The woman stumbled into the saloon just as the sun began its descent behind the jagged peaks of the Colorado Rockies, her dress torn at the hem and dust coating every inch of her trembling frame. And when she looked up at the tall cowboy standing near the bar, her eyes held a desperation that made every man in the room fall silent. Jack Morgan had been nursing his whiskey for the better part of an hour, trying to forget the empty ranch waiting for him 15 miles north of Silver Ridge, when the door burst open, and she appeared like some wild creature fleeing from death itself. Her hair, the color of autumn wheat, had come loose from its pins and cascaded over her shoulders in tangled waves. Blood stained her sleeve, though whether it was her own or someone else's, he could not tell. She swayed on her feet, one hand gripping the doorframe, the other pressed protectively against her abdomen. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking with exhaustion and fear. "Someone please help me." Jack set down his glass and moved toward her without thinking, his boots heavy against the wooden floorboards. He reached her just as her knees buckled, catching her before she hit the ground. She was lighter than he expected, as though weeks of running had stripped away everything but bone and determination. Her eyes fluttered open, green as new grass after spring rain, and focused on his face with an intensity that struck him somewhere deep in his chest. "I need to hide," she said, her fingers clutching at his shirt collar. "He cannot find me here, he cannot." The bartender, a grizzled man named Pete who had seen every kind of trouble the frontier had to offer, wiped down a glass and called out, "Jack, you bringing trouble into my establishment." "No trouble, Pete," Jack replied, though he was not entirely sure that was true. He helped the woman to a chair in the corner, away from the curious stares of the handful of patrons scattered throughout the room. The year was 1878, and Silver Ridge had grown from a mining camp into a proper town with a church, a schoolhouse, and 3 saloons competing for the miners' wages. It was a place where people came to start over, to leave behind whatever sins or sorrows had chased them from their former lives. Jack knelt beside her chair, studying her face in the dim lamplight. She could not have been more than 22 or 23 years old, with delicate features that spoke of a gentler upbringing than the rough-and-tumble life of the mining towns. Her hands, though dirty and scraped, were not the calloused hands of someone accustomed to hard labor. "What is your name?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the door as though expecting it to burst open at any moment. "Sarah," she finally said. "Sarah Bennett." "I am Jack Morgan. Tell me what happened, Sarah." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over and cutting clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. She took a shuddering breath, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely audible over the low murmur of conversation resuming around them. "I am pregnant by a man who is hunting me down," she cried, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "He will not let me go. He has followed me across 3 territories, and every time I think I have escaped him, he finds me again. I do not know what else to do. I cannot keep running forever, but if he catches me, he will kill me or worse." Jack felt something cold settle in his gut. He had seen plenty of violence in his 30 years, had participated in more than his share during the war and in the years that followed. But there was something about this woman, about the raw terror in her eyes and the protective way she held herself, that stirred an anger he had not felt in a long time. "He will never find you again," Jack said, the words coming out with a certainty he did not entirely feel but meant with every fiber of his being. "I promise you that." Sarah stared at him, searching his face as though trying to determine whether she could trust this stranger who had appeared at the moment of her greatest need. Whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she sagged back in the chair, some of the tension draining from her body. "You do not understand," she said. "Marcus Thornton is not like other men. He has money, connections, and a reputation that makes people afraid to cross him. He owns half of Leadville and has the law in his pocket. When I left him, I knew he would come after me, but I thought if I could just get far enough away, if I could disappear completely, he might eventually give up. But he has not. He has hired trackers, bounty hunters, men who know how to find people who do not want to be found. Jack pulled up a chair and sat down facing her, his mind already working through possibilities. How far behind you is he? I saw his men in Gunnison 2 days ago. I stole a horse and rode through the night to get here. I do not know if they followed my trail or if they lost it in the mountains, but they are close, too close. Are you hurt? That blood on your sleeve? Sarah glanced down at the stain as though she had forgotten it was there. I fell crossing a creek, scraped my arm on the rocks. It is nothing serious. We should get you cleaned up and fed. You look like you have not had a proper meal in days. I cannot afford to rest. I need to keep moving. Jack reached out and gently took her hand, feeling the tremor that ran through her fingers. You are exhausted and you are with child. You need to eat and sleep, or you will not make it another day, let alone stay ahead of whoever is chasing you. My ranch is not far from here. It is off the main road, tucked back in a valley where most folks do not venture. You can rest there tonight and we will figure out what to do come morning. Why would you help me? You do not even know me. It was a fair question, one Jack did not have a simple answer for. He thought of his own past, of the people who had helped him when he had needed it most, and of the long, lonely years he had spent building a life on a piece of land that felt more like a refuge than a home. Perhaps it was the memory of his sister, who had died young and frightened at the hands of a man not unlike the one Sarah was fleeing. Perhaps it was simply the right thing to do. Let us just say I do not abide men who hurt women, he said. Now, can you ride, or should I get a wagon? I can ride, Sarah said, straightening her spine with visible effort. But I lost my horse when I came into town. I turned it loose in an alley so no one could connect it to me. Jack nodded and stood. Wait here. I will get my horse and bring it around back. Pete will make sure no one bothers you. He caught the bartender's eye and jerked his chin towards Sarah. Pete, who had known Jack since he had first arrived in Silver Ridge 5 years earlier, gave a slight nod of understanding. Jack left through the back door, moving quickly through the gathering dusk to the livery stable where he had left his bay gelding. The horse, a sturdy animal named Copper, greeted him with a soft nicker. As Jack saddled Copper, his mind raced with the implications of what he had just agreed to do. Hiding a fugitive woman, even one fleeing from a dangerous man rather than the law, could bring trouble down on his head. But the alternative, turning her away to face whatever fate awaited her, was something he could not stomach. He led Copper around to the back of the saloon, where Sarah was waiting just inside the door. She had wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, likely borrowed from one of the saloon girls, and had attempted to tidy her hair. In the fading light, she looked almost ethereal, like a ghost haunting the edges of the civilized world. Jack helped her mount, then swung up behind her. She stiffened at the close contact, and he could feel the rapid beat of her heart against his chest. It is about a 45-minute ride, he said close to her ear. Try to relax. Copper is sure-footed, even in the dark. They rode out of Silver Ridge, taking the north road for a short distance before Jack turned off onto a barely visible trail that wound up into the foothills. The mountains rose around them like ancient sentinels, their peaks still capped with snow despite the late summer heat that baked the lower elevations. The air grew cooler as they climbed, carrying the scent of pine and wild sage. Sarah remained silent for most of the journey, her body gradually relaxing against his as exhaustion claimed its due. Jack kept one arm around her waist, steadying her when she began to sway with fatigue. He found himself acutely aware of her presence, of the trust she was placing in him despite having known him for less than an hour. The ranch appeared suddenly, nestled in a valley between 2 ridges. It was a modest spread, a log cabin with a stone chimney, a small barn, and a corral that currently held 3 horses and a milk cow. Jack had built most of it himself, cutting timber from the surrounding forest and hauling stones from the creek that ran through the property. It was not much, but it was his, and it was a place where a person could disappear if they needed to. He dismounted and helped Sarah down, noting the way she winced as her feet hit the ground. Her boots were worn through in places, and he suspected her feet were blistered and raw from days of hard travel. "Come inside," he said, leading her toward the cabin. "I will start a fire and heat some water so you can wash up. I have some stew left from yesterday that I can warm up." The interior of the cabin was simple but clean. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a cooking area to one side. A table and 2 chairs sat in the center of the room, and a bed was tucked into the far corner, separated from the rest of the space by a curtain that could be drawn for privacy. Shelves lined the walls, holding dishes, supplies, and a few well-worn books. Jack lit a lamp and set about building a fire, while Sarah sank into one of the chairs with a sigh that seemed to come from the depths of her soul. Once the fire was crackling, he filled a kettle with water from the bucket by the door and hung it over the flames. "The bed is yours tonight," he said. "I will sleep in the barn." "I cannot take your bed," Sarah protested weakly. "You can and you will. You need proper rest, and you will not get it trying to sleep on the floor or in the barn." While the water heated, Jack dished out the leftover stew and set it before her with a piece of bread from the tin on the shelf. Sarah ate slowly at first, as though her stomach had forgotten what food was, then with increasing hunger. Jack busied himself gathering blankets from the chest at the foot of the bed, trying to give her some semblance of privacy despite the small space. When the water was hot, he poured it into a basin and set it on the table with a clean cloth and a bar of soap. "I will step outside for a bit," he said. "Give you some time to yourself. I need to tend to Copper anyway." Sarah looked up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I do not know how I can ever repay you for your kindness." "No repayment necessary," Jack said. "Just rest and try not to worry. We will figure this out." He left the cabin and made his way to the barn, where he unsaddled Copper and gave the horse a thorough rub-down. The familiar rhythm of the work helped settle his thoughts. He had not been lying when he told Sarah he did not abide men who hurt women, but he also knew that going up against someone like Marcus Thornton, a man with money and power, was not something to be taken lightly. By the time Jack returned to the cabin, Sarah had washed and changed into one of his old shirts, which hung on her like a dress. She was standing by the window, looking out at the darkened valley, one hand resting on her belly. "How far along are you?" Jack asked, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. 4 months, I think, maybe closer to 5. It is hard to say for certain." "And Thornton, he is the father?" Sarah turned to face him, her expression hardening. "Yes, though he does not deserve that title. I was foolish and naive when I met him. He was charming, attentive, and he made me feel like I was the most important person in the world. By the time I realized what he truly was, it was too late. He was controlling, possessive, and when he drank, he became violent. I endured it for months, telling myself that he would change, that the man I had fallen in love with was still in there somewhere, but he only got worse." She wrapped her arms around herself, her gaze distant. "When I discovered I was pregnant, I thought perhaps it would change things. I thought maybe the idea of becoming a father would soften him. Instead, it made him even more possessive. He told me I would never leave him, that the child belonged to him, and that he would make sure I understood my place. That night, after he passed out from drinking, I took what little money I could find and left. I have been running ever since." Jack felt his jaw tighten with anger, but he kept his voice calm. "You did the right thing. A man like that, he does not change, he only gets worse. I know that now. But knowing it does not make any of this easier. I am terrified, Jack. Terrified of what he will do if he finds me, and terrified of bringing a child into the world under these circumstances. I do not know how to be a mother. I do not know if I am strong enough to do this alone." Jack crossed the room and stood before her, meeting her eyes with a steady gaze. "You are stronger than you think, Sarah. You have survived this long on your own, evaded men who make their living tracking people down. That takes courage and determination, and you are not alone anymore." I meant what I said earlier. He will never find you again. I will make sure of it. But how? Even if we hide here for a while, he will not stop looking. He has the resources to search for years if he has to. Then we make sure he has no reason to keep searching. We make him think you are dead." Sarah stared at him, her eyes widening. "What do you mean?" Jack had been turning the idea over in his mind since they left town, examining it from every angle. It was risky and it would require careful planning, but it might be their best chance. "If Thornton believes you died, he will call off his men and stop looking. We stage your death in a way that is believable, something that would explain why no body was recovered. A fall into a ravine, perhaps, or drowning in one of the mountain rivers. We leave enough evidence to make it convincing, and then you disappear completely. New name, new life. And you would help me do this. Risk your own safety for a stranger." Jack hesitated, trying to find the words to explain the complicated mix of emotions driving him. "My sister died when I was 18, he said finally. "Her husband was a cruel man, much like Thornton from the sound of it. She tried to leave him once, but he found her and brought her back. A month later, she fell down a flight of stairs and broke her neck. Everyone knew it was not an accident, but no one could prove it, and he had enough friends in town that no one was willing to try. I swore then that if I ever had the chance to help someone in a similar situation, I would not turn away. I failed my sister. I will not fail you." Sarah reached out and took his hand, her fingers cold despite the warmth of the fire. "I am sorry about your sister, and I am grateful beyond words for what you are doing, but I need you to understand something. If Marcus finds out you helped me, he will not just hurt you, he will destroy you. He has done it to others who crossed him. I could not live with myself if that happened because of me." "Let me worry about that," Jack said. "Right now you need to rest. Tomorrow we will start making plans." Sarah nodded slowly, exhaustion finally winning out over her fears. Jack pulled back the curtain that separated the bed from the rest of the cabin and gestured for her to lie down. She did so gratefully, and he covered her with one of the blankets. Within moments, her breathing had deepened into sleep. Jack extinguished the lamp and settled into the chair by the fire, his mind too active to allow for rest. He watched the flames dance and flicker, thinking about the path he had just committed himself to. It was one thing to offer shelter for a night, quite another to actively deceive a powerful man and his hired trackers. But looking at Sarah's sleeping form, seeing the vulnerability and the courage she carried in equal measure, he knew he could not have made any other choice. The next morning dawned clear and cool, with mist rising from the valley floor like steam from a kettle. Jack woke to find Sarah already up, standing at the stove attempting to make coffee. She had rolled up the sleeves of his shirt and tied her hair back with a piece of string, and there was a determined set to her shoulders that had been absent the night before. "You should still be resting," Jack said, stretching the kinks out of his back from sleeping in the chair. "I have rested more in the past 8 hours than I have in the past 2 weeks, Sarah replied. "Besides, I need to feel useful. I cannot just sit idle while you do everything." They ate a simple breakfast of cornmeal mush and bacon, and Jack laid out his plan in more detail. They would ride to a place he knew, a narrow gorge about 20 miles east where a river churned through rapids before dropping over a waterfall. It was the kind of place where accidents happened, where the unwary or desperate might easily lose their footing and be swept away. They would leave evidence of Sarah's presence, perhaps some torn clothing and personal items, and Jack would report finding them to the sheriff in Silver Ridge. Word would spread, as it always did in small towns, and with any luck, it would reach Thornton's ears. "What about afterward?" Sarah asked. "Even if Marcus believes I am dead, I cannot stay here indefinitely. People in town will notice me eventually and questions will be asked." "We will need to get you further away," Jack agreed. "I have a friend in California, runs a ranch near Sacramento. He owes me a favor from way back. I could write to him, see if he would be willing to take you on as a housekeeper or some such. California is far enough from Colorado that Thornton is unlikely to have much reach there, and it is a big enough place that one more person will not attract attention. That sounds like a good plan, but it will take weeks to arrange. What do I do in the meantime? You stay here. The ranch is isolated enough that as long as you stay out of sight when anyone comes around, you should be safe. I will make a trip to Leadville, see what I can learn about Thornton and his operation. If we are going to convince him you are dead, I need to know how his mind works, what he is likely to believe. Sarah looked uncomfortable with the idea of Jack putting himself at risk, but she nodded. When would we go to this gorge to stage my death? Today, if you are up for it. The sooner we get this done, the sooner you can start breathing easier. They set out mid-morning, both mounted this time on two of Jack's horses. The ride to the gorge took them through some of the most beautiful country in Colorado, with aspens beginning to show the first hints of gold and wildflowers still blooming in the high meadows. Under different circumstances, it might have been a pleasant journey, but the weight of what they were about to do hung over them. The gorge, when they reached it, was as dramatic as Jack remembered. The river had carved a deep channel through the rock, and the water roared with a violence that spoke of the snowmelt still feeding it from the higher peaks. A person who fell into that torrent would be lucky to survive more than a few minutes, and recovering a body would be nearly impossible. Sarah stood at the edge, staring down at the churning water, her face pale. "It is terrifying," she said. "I can see why it would be believable that someone might not survive a fall here." Jack helped her arrange the scene. They tore a piece of her dress and caught it on a jagged rock near the edge, as though she had stumbled and grabbed for purchase. They left one of her boots wedged between two stones, and Jack took a locket she wore around her neck and let it fall into a crevice where it would be visible but not easily retrieved. It was grim work, made worse by the very real knowledge that what they were staging could easily have been Sarah's actual fate if desperation had driven her to take her own life. When they were satisfied that the scene looked convincing, they mounted up and headed back toward the ranch. Jack would wait a day, then ride into Silver Ridge and inform the sheriff that he had come across disturbing signs near the gorge while checking on some stray cattle. The sheriff, a decent enough man named Tom Bradley, would likely organize a search, but Jack was confident that the evidence they had left would lead to the conclusion that Sarah had died in an accidental fall. Over the next few days, a strange sort of routine established itself at the ranch. Sarah proved to be remarkably capable despite her ordeal, helping with chores around the property and even beginning to prepare the small garden plot for a late-season planting. Jack found himself enjoying her company in ways he had not anticipated. She was intelligent and surprisingly well-read, and in the evenings they would sit by the fire and talk about everything from books to philosophy to their respective childhoods. Sarah had been raised in St. Louis, the daughter of a schoolteacher and a seamstress. Her father had died of pneumonia when she was 16, and her mother had followed 2 years later, leaving Sarah alone in the world. She had taken a position as a governess for a wealthy family, which was how she had met Marcus Thornton at a social gathering. He had swept her off her feet with promises of a better life, and she had believed him. Jack, for his part, shared more about his own past than he had with anyone in years. He told her about growing up on a farm in Missouri, about the way the war had torn his family apart, and about the aimless years that had followed before he finally found his way to Colorado. He spoke of his sister Mary with a tenderness that made Sarah's eyes fill with tears, and about the guilt he still carried for not being there when she needed him most. "You were just a boy yourself when she died," Sarah said gently. "You cannot blame yourself for not being able to save her." "I know that in my head," Jack replied, "but my heart has a harder time accepting it." On the 4th day after their trip to the gorge, Jack rode into Silver Ridge to set the next phase of their plan in motion. He found Sheriff Bradley at his office, a small building next to the courthouse, and with a carefully rehearsed expression of concern reported what he had found. The sheriff listened intently, his weathered face growing grave. "That is a bad spot," he said. We have lost 3 people to that gorge in the past 5 years. If this woman you saw in the saloon the other night went out there, she likely did not survive." "I did not know her name," Jack said, which was not entirely a lie. He had not known her name when he first saw her in the saloon. "But she seemed troubled, like maybe she was running from something. I have been turning it over in my mind, wondering if I should have done more to help her." "You cannot save everyone, Jack," Bradley said, echoing Sarah's words from a few nights earlier. "I will ride out there tomorrow with a couple of men and take a look. If we find anything more, I will let you know." Jack left the sheriff's office and made his way to the general store, where he purchased supplies and, more importantly, listened to the gossip flowing through the town. News of the mysterious woman who had appeared at the saloon and then vanished had already spread, with various theories about who she was and where she had come from. Jack added his own small piece to the puzzle, mentioning to the storekeeper that he had found some concerning evidence near the gorge. By the time he rode back to the ranch, he was confident that the story would spread quickly. Within a week, he expected that every town within 100 miles would have heard some version of it, and if Thornton's men were still in the area, they would hear it too. Sarah was waiting anxiously when he returned, and he filled her in on everything that had happened. "Now we wait," he said. "Give it a couple of weeks for the story to spread and for Thornton to hear about it. In the meantime, I need to make that trip to Leadville to see what I can learn about his operation." "I do not like the idea of you going there," Sarah said, worry evident in her voice. "What if someone recognizes you? What if they make the connection between us?" "No one there knows me, and I will be careful, but I need to get a sense of what we are dealing with. If Thornton does not buy that you are dead, we need to be prepared." Jack made the trip to Leadville a few days later, leaving Sarah with strict instructions to stay out of sight and to fire 3 shots from the rifle if anyone came to the ranch while he was gone. Leadville was a booming mining town, larger and rougher than Silver Ridge, with a population that seemed to change daily as prospectors came and went, chasing the dream of silver. He spent 2 days there, keeping his ears open in saloons and gambling halls, asking casual questions about Marcus Thornton. What he learned disturbed him. Thornton was indeed a powerful man, with interests in several mines and a reputation for ruthlessness that kept most people from crossing him. He also learned that Thornton had been in Leadville as recently as a week ago, meeting with the men he had hired to track down Sarah. On the second evening, Jack overheard a conversation that made his blood run cold. 2 men at the bar, both with the hard look of professional trackers, were discussing their search. One of them mentioned that Thornton was offering a substantial reward for information leading to the recovery of his wayward wife, and that he refused to believe she could have simply vanished. "He is obsessed," one of the men said. "I have worked for some determined clients in my time, but this man takes it to another level. He has convinced himself that she is still alive somewhere, hiding, and that someone is helping her." "Well, we get paid either way," the other replied. "As long as he keeps signing the checks, I will keep looking. Though I have to say, the trail has gone cold as a witch's heart. She was in Gunnison, that much we know, but after that, nothing. It is like she disappeared into thin air." Jack left Leadville the next morning, his mind racing with what he had learned. Thornton was not going to give up easily, which meant they needed to be even more careful. The staged death might buy them some time, but it was not a guarantee. When he returned to the ranch, he found Sarah working in the garden, her face flushed from the sun and her movements slow with the growing weight of her pregnancy. She looked up at his approach and smiled, a genuine expression of warmth that made something in his chest tighten. Over the evening meal, he told her what he had learned in Leadville. Sarah listened quietly, her hands resting on her belly. "So it may not be enough," she said when he finished. "Even if he hears about the gorge, he may not believe it. We will give it some more time," Jack said. "Let the story settle and spread. And in the meantime, I will write to my friend in California, start making arrangements for you to go there." But as the days turned into weeks, something shifted between them. It started small, little moments of connection that felt like more than just the bond between two people thrown together by circumstance. The way Sarah's laugh, rare but genuine, made Jack smile even when he was bone-tired from a day of hard work. The way she had begun to anticipate his needs, setting out his coffee in the morning before he woke or mending his shirts without being asked. The way he found himself thinking about her constantly when he was out checking the fences or tending the horses, wondering what she was doing and whether she was comfortable. One evening in early October, as they sat by the fire after supper, Sarah suddenly placed Jack's hand on her belly. "Feel that?" she asked, her eyes bright with wonder. Jack felt a small but distinct movement under his palm, a flutter like a bird's wing. "The baby," he said, amazed. "Yes, it has been moving more and more lately. It is the strangest feeling, like there is a whole other life inside me." Her expression grew wistful. "I wish I could feel more excited about it, but every time I think about the baby, I think about Marcus and everything that happened. This child deserves better than to be born out of fear and violence." Jack kept his hand on her belly, feeling another tiny movement. "This child is going to be born to a mother who is brave and strong and who has fought against impossible odds to give it a better life. That is what matters. Not the circumstances of conception, but the love and sacrifice that came after." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and before Jack quite knew what was happening, she had leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. It was a soft kiss, tentative and questioning, and it sent a shock through his entire body. For a moment he froze, unsure of how to respond. Then he cupped her face in his hands and kissed her back, pouring into it all the emotions he had been afraid to acknowledge. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Sarah looked at him with a mixture of hope and fear. "I am sorry," she said. "I should not have done that. You have been nothing but kind to me, and I have no right to complicate things by involving my feelings." "Do not apologize," Jack said, his voice rough. "I have been fighting my feelings for you since the day you walked into that saloon. I told myself it was just compassion, that I was helping you because it was the right thing to do. But the truth is, I have fallen for you, Sarah. Completely and utterly fallen for you. And it terrifies me because I know you have been through so much, and the last thing you need is another man making demands on you." Sarah shook her head, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "You are nothing like Marcus, nothing at all. He took what he wanted without caring about my feelings or needs. But you have given and given without asking for anything in return. You have made me feel safe for the first time in longer than I can remember. And yes, I have feelings for you too. I do not know if it is wise, given everything that is happening, but I cannot help it. You have shown me what kindness looks like, what respect looks like, and I find myself wanting to be near you all the time." Jack pulled her into his arms, holding her gently, mindful of her condition. They stayed like that for a long time, neither speaking, just taking comfort in each other's presence. Finally, Sarah pulled back and looked up at him. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We take it one day at a time," Jack said. "We do not rush anything, and we figure things out as we go. But I want you to know, Sarah, that I am here for you. Not just to protect you from Thornton, but for whatever you need, for as long as you need it." The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Jack's life, despite the shadow of Thornton's hunt still hanging over them. He and Sarah grew closer with each passing day, learning each other's habits and preferences, sharing stories and dreams. They kissed often, tender moments stolen between chores or in the quiet evenings by the fire, but Jack was careful not to push for more. Sarah had made it clear that she needed time to heal from what Thornton had done to her, and Jack was determined to give her that time. News from Silver Ridge confirmed that the story of Sarah's death had spread widely. The sheriff had conducted a search of the gorge and found the evidence Jack and Sarah had left. The official conclusion was that an unknown woman, likely a drifter or someone fleeing from trouble, had fallen to her death in the rapids. The locket had been recovered, though no one had been able to identify its owner, and a brief notice had been posted in several regional newspapers about the tragic accident. Jack made another trip to Leadville in late October, and this time the news was more encouraging. The trackers he had overheard before were no longer in town, and when he carefully inquired about Marcus Thornton, he learned that the man had returned to his business interests, apparently satisfied that his search was over. The barkeep at one establishment mentioned that Thornton had been in a foul mood for weeks, but had recently seemed to accept that his runaway woman was never coming back. When Jack returned to the ranch with this news, Sarah wept with relief. "Do you really think it is over?" she asked. "Do you think he has finally given up?" "I think he believes you are dead," Jack said carefully. "Which means he has no reason to keep searching, but we should still be cautious for a while longer, give it a few more months before we make any major decisions." As winter approached, Jack found himself reconsidering his earlier plan to send Sarah to California. The thought of her leaving, of not seeing her every day or hearing her voice or feeling the warmth of her presence, was becoming unbearable. And from the way Sarah looked at him, the way she sought out his company and his touch, he suspected she felt the same way. One snowy evening in December, as they sat together on the small sofa Jack had built, Sarah's head resting on his shoulder, she said quietly, "I have been thinking about California." Jack's heart sank. "Have you?" "Yes, and I do not want to go." He turned to look at her, hope flaring in his chest. "You do not?" Sarah shook her head, her hand finding his and lacing their fingers together. "I want to stay here with you. I know that is asking a lot, given everything. I come with complications, a child that is not yours and a past that could still catch up with us. But I cannot imagine being anywhere else, Jack. This ranch, this life, you have become my home." Jack cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "There is nothing I want more than for you to stay. I love you, Sarah. I love you and I love this baby, and I want to build a life with you here. I want to marry you if you will have me and raise this child as my own." Sarah's breath caught, her eyes searching his face. "You would do that? You would take on another man's child as your own? This child is yours," Jack said firmly. "And that makes it mine too. Blood does not make a family, Sarah. Love does, choice does, and I choose you, I choose both of you." Sarah kissed him then, deeply and passionately, and for the first time since they had met, Jack felt her completely let go of the fear and guardedness she had carried. When they finally broke apart, both flushed and breathless, she said, "Yes, yes, I will marry you, Jack Morgan. I will be your wife and build this life with you, and I will spend every day grateful that I stumbled into that saloon." They were married in January of 1879 in a quiet ceremony at the small church in Silver Ridge. The pastor, an elderly man who asked few questions, performed the service, and Pete from the saloon and the general store owner served as witnesses. Sarah wore a simple dress of blue calico that Jack had bought for her, and she had never looked more beautiful to him than she did standing before the altar, her hand in his, promising to love and honor him. The winter was hard, as winters in the Colorado mountains always were, but Jack and Sarah faced it together. They spent long evenings by the fire, talking and reading and planning for the future. Jack built a cradle out of pine, sanding it smooth and carving small flowers into the headboard. Sarah sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her face serene despite the approaching uncertainty of childbirth. In late February, on a night when the wind howled around the cabin and snow fell thick and fast, Sarah went into labor. Jack had arranged for a midwife from Silver Ridge to come when the time grew near, but the storm made travel impossible. He found himself alone with Sarah, trying to remember everything he had ever heard about delivering babies, his hands shaking with fear and adrenaline. "You can do this," Sarah said between contractions, her face pale but determined. "We can do this together." And they did. In the early hours of the morning, as the storm began to break and the first light of dawn crept across the valley, Sarah gave birth to a son. Jack wrapped the baby in a soft blanket and placed him in Sarah's arms, his own eyes burning with tears as he looked at the tiny, perfect face. "He is beautiful," Jack whispered. "You are beautiful. You are the strongest person I have ever known." Sarah smiled up at him, exhausted but radiant. "What should we name him?" Jack thought for a moment, then said, "What about Samuel? It means God has heard, because I think, in a way, our prayers were heard. We found each other when we both needed it most." "Samuel Morgan," Sarah said, testing the name. "I love it." The months that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and the overwhelming responsibility of caring for a newborn, but Jack had never been happier. He discovered a capacity for love he had not known he possessed, not just for Sarah, but for the tiny boy who had come into their lives. Samuel was a good baby, quick to smile and curious about everything, and watching him grow and change filled Jack with a sense of purpose he had never felt before. By the time summer arrived, Jack had expanded the cabin, adding a second room that would serve as a nursery when Samuel was older and space for any future children they might have. The ranch was prospering too, with a small herd of cattle now grazing in the valley and plans to increase their numbers in the coming years. One warm June evening, as Jack sat on the porch watching Sarah hang laundry while Samuel slept in a basket nearby, he reflected on how much his life had changed in less than a year. The lonely cowboy who had been nursing a whiskey in a saloon was gone, replaced by a husband and father with responsibilities and dreams that extended far beyond his own survival. Sarah caught him watching and smiled, that same radiant smile that had captivated him from the beginning. She finished hanging the last shirt and came to sit beside him, her head resting on his shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About how different my life is now, about how grateful I am that you walked into that saloon when you did." "I think about that too," Sarah said softly. "About how terrified I was and how sure I was that nothing good could possibly come from the mess I had made of my life. And then there you were, this man who asked for nothing and gave everything. You saved me, Jack. You and this place and this life we have built together, you saved me." "We saved each other," Jack corrected gently. "You gave me a reason to be more than just a man existing day to day. You gave me a family and a future." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the valley coming alive with the approach of evening. Birds called from the trees, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. It was peaceful, the kind of peace that sinks into your bones and makes you believe that maybe, just maybe, good things can last. "You ever worry that Marcus will find out?" Sarah asked, giving voice to the fear that neither of them spoke of often but that still lingered in the back of their minds. "That somehow he will learn that I am alive." "Sometimes," Jack admitted, "but with each month that passes it becomes less likely. We are careful. You stay out of sight when strangers come around, and as far as anyone in Silver Ridge knows, you are my wife who came from back east to marry me. The story of the woman who died in the gorge is old news now, forgotten by most folks. I think we are safe, Sarah. I really do." Sarah nodded, but Jack could sense her lingering unease. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders and pulled her close. "Even if he did find out, which I do not believe he will, he would have to go through me to get to you, and I promise you that is not going to happen. You are my wife, and Samuel is my son, and I will protect you both with everything I have." "I know you would," Sarah said. "It is one of the reasons I love you." As summer turned to fall and then to winter again, life on the ranch settled into a rhythm. Samuel grew from an infant into a toddler, taking his first wobbly steps just before his first birthday and delighting them both with his first words. Jack taught him to feed the chickens and to pet the horses gently, and Sarah sang to him in the evenings, old songs from her childhood that made Jack's heart ache with their beauty. In the spring of 1880, Sarah discovered she was pregnant again. This time, there was no fear or uncertainty, only joy and anticipation. They spent the months preparing, expanding the nursery and making plans for how they would manage with two small children. Their daughter was born in November, during an unseasonably warm spell that made the delivery easier than Samuel's had been. The midwife from Silver Ridge attended this time, and everything went smoothly. They named her Mary after Jack's sister, and when Sarah placed the tiny girl in his arms, Jack felt a piece of his heart that had been broken for so long finally heal. "Mary Morgan," he said, looking down at his daughter's perfect little face. "Welcome to the world, sweetheart. You are going to be so loved." Life with 2 children was chaotic and exhausting and more fulfilling than Jack could have imagined. Samuel was a devoted big brother, always wanting to help with Mary, and Sarah seemed to bloom in her role as mother and wife. The darkness that had shadowed her eyes when they first met was gone, replaced by a contentment that made her even more beautiful. Years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the milestones of their children's lives. Samuel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and spent hours listening to Jack's stories about the old days. Mary was her mother's daughter, with the same green eyes and quick smile, and a stubborn independence that both frustrated and delighted them. By 1885, Jack had built the ranch into a successful operation. They had a substantial herd of cattle, good relationships with buyers in Denver, and a reputation for fair dealing that brought them steady business. Jack had even hired a young man to help with the heavier work, allowing him more time with his family. One evening in late spring, as they celebrated Samuel's 6th birthday with a cake Sarah had made and small gifts they had painstakingly saved for, Jack looked around the table at his family and felt a profound sense of gratitude. Sarah caught his eye and smiled, that private smile that was just for him, and reached across the table to take his hand. Later, after the children were asleep, they sat on the porch as they often did, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Sarah leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, and sighed contentedly. "Do you remember when you told me he would never find me again?" she asked. "I remember," Jack said. "You kept your promise. You gave me a life I never dreamed was possible. You gave me safety and love and a family. I know I have said it before, but I need to say it again. Thank you, Jack. Thank you for choosing me, for choosing us." Jack turned to face her, cupping her face in his hands. "I would choose you 1,000 times over in any life, in any circumstance. You are my heart, Sarah. You and our children, you are everything." They kissed then, a long, slow kiss filled with the passion and tenderness that had only deepened over the years. When they finally pulled apart, Sarah rested her forehead against his. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," Jack replied. Always and forever. The summer of 1885 brought new challenges and new joys. Sarah discovered she was pregnant for a 3rd time, a surprise given that Mary was already 4 and they had assumed their family was complete. But the news brought excitement rather than worry, and they began making preparations for another addition to their household. Samuel had started attending the small school in Silver Ridge, riding in with Jack 3 times a week, and staying with the teacher's family on those nights. He was a bright student, already reading at a level beyond his years, and Jack could not have been prouder. Mary, meanwhile, had taken to following her father around the ranch, mimicking his every movement and declaring that she was going to be a cowgirl when she grew up. One afternoon in August, as Jack was working on repairing a section of fence, a stranger rode up the trail toward the ranch. Jack's first instinct was wariness, a protective caution that had never entirely left him despite the years of peace. He set down his tools and walked to meet the rider, noting the well-worn saddle and the weary look of someone who had been traveling for some time. The stranger was a man in his 50s, with gray hair and a weathered face. He raised his hand in greeting as he approached. "Good afternoon," he called. "I am looking for Jack Morgan." "You found him," Jack said, his tone neutral. "What can I do for you?" The man dismounted and extended his hand. "Name is Thomas Wright. I am a lawyer from Denver. I have been trying to track you down for several weeks now." Jack's stomach tightened with apprehension, but he shook the man's hand and waited for him to continue. "I represent the estate of Marcus Thornton," Wright said, and Jack felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Mr. Thornton passed away 3 months ago, complications from pneumonia. As his lawyer, I have been working to settle his affairs, which has included tracking down certain individuals who may have an interest in the estate. Jack forced himself to remain calm, even as his mind raced. I am afraid I do not understand. I never knew anyone named Marcus Thornton. Wright pulled a document from his saddlebag and unfolded it. According to the records I have been able to piece together, you may know the whereabouts of a woman named Sarah Bennett, who was at one time involved with Mr. Thornton. There is some indication that she may have survived an incident that was reported as her death in 1878. Mr. Thornton never fully accepted that she had died, and in his will, he made provisions for her and for a child that may have been born as a result of their relationship. If she is indeed alive, she and the child are entitled to a substantial sum of money. Jack's mind reeled with the implications. Thornton was dead. The threat that had haunted them for years was gone. But now there was this new complication, the possibility that their carefully constructed new life could be exposed. Why would you think I would know anything about this woman? Jack asked carefully. Wright looked at him with eyes that had seen too much to be easily fooled. Because you were one of the last people to see her before her supposed death. You reported finding evidence of an accident at the gorge, and because I am a thorough man, Mr. Morgan, and when I made inquiries in Silver Ridge, I learned that you acquired a wife from back east around the same time that Sarah Bennett disappeared. A wife whose description matches Miss Bennett quite closely. Jack said nothing, his mind working through options and outcomes. If he denied everything, Wright might leave, but he might also continue to dig. If he confirmed Sarah's identity, it would mean revealing the deception they had maintained for years, but it would also mean financial security for his family, and the final, irrevocable end to Thornton's shadow over their lives. If such a woman did exist, Jack said slowly, and if she were alive, what exactly would this mean for her? Wright's expression softened slightly. It would mean that she would inherit a sum of approximately $20,000, along with some property in Leadville. It would also mean that any child born of her relationship with Thornton would have a legal claim to the name and whatever social standing that entails, though given Thornton's reputation, that may not be something she would want. Most importantly, it would mean that she would be free, legally and publicly recognized as a separate individual with no claims against her. Jack turned and looked back toward the cabin, where he could see Sarah through the window, rocking baby Mary while Samuel played nearby. He thought about the life they had built, the safety and happiness they had found, and he knew that this decision was not his alone to make. "Wait here," he said to Wright. "I need to speak with my wife." He walked back to the cabin, his steps heavy with the weight of what he was about to do. Sarah looked up as he entered, her smile fading when she saw his expression. "What is it?" she asked. "What is wrong?" Jack explained quickly, keeping his voice low so the children would not hear. Sarah's face went pale and she clutched Mary tighter. "He is dead," she whispered. "Marcus is truly dead." "He is," Jack confirmed. "And according to this lawyer, he left you money in his will, a lot of money, but claiming it would mean admitting who you are, that you faked your death." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her eyes distant as she processed this information. Finally, she said, "What do you think we should do?" "I think it is your decision," Jack said. "That money could change our lives. We could expand the ranch, ensure the children have everything they need, maybe even hire more help so we do not have to work so hard. But it would also mean revealing our secret, and I do not know what consequences that might bring." Sarah stood and walked to the window, looking out at the land they had made their own. "We have built a good life here without Thornton's money. We do not need it to be happy. But you are right that it could provide security for our children, opportunities they might not have otherwise." She turned back to face him, her expression resolute. "I want to claim it, not because I need it, but because it is mine." Marcus Thornton took so much from me, my innocence, my sense of safety, years of my life spent running and hiding. If he left me money, it is only a fraction of what he owed me, and I want Samuel to know where he came from, not the ugly parts, but the truth. He deserves to grow up without secrets. Jack crossed the room and took her hands in his. Are you sure? Once we do this, we cannot take it back. I am sure, Sarah said. We have nothing to hide, not really. We built this life out of necessity and survival, but it has become something beautiful and real. I am not ashamed of that, and I will not let the last remnants of Marcus Thornton's control over my life keep me from claiming what is rightfully mine. Together, they walked back outside to where Thomas Wright was waiting patiently by his horse. Sarah stood tall, her chin lifted, and said, Mr. Wright, I am Sarah Bennett, or I was. Now I am Sarah Morgan, and yes, I am alive, despite what the records might say. Wright nodded as though he had expected nothing less. I am glad to finally meet you, Mrs. Morgan. I apologize for any distress my arrival may have caused. I assure you, my only interest is in settling Mr. Thornton's estate according to his wishes and the law. Over the next hour, they sat at the table in the cabin while Wright explained the details of Thornton's will and the process for claiming Sarah's inheritance. He also shared some news that brought Sarah to tears. Marcus Thornton, in the months before his death, had apparently undergone something of a transformation. Faced with his own mortality and plagued by guilt, he had written a confession of sorts, admitting to the abuse he had inflicted on Sarah and expressing remorse for his actions. It was this confession, along with his instructions to find Sarah and ensure she received the money he owed her, that had sent Wright on his search. I do not think it excuses what he did, Wright said carefully. But I do think he recognized at the end that he had been a cruel man who had harmed someone who did not deserve it. Sarah wiped her eyes and nodded. It does not excuse it, she agreed, but it does give me some measure of peace. Perhaps he found some redemption before he died. The process of claiming the inheritance took several months, during which Wright worked with authorities in both Colorado and Missouri to establish Sarah's identity and verify her claim. There was some awkwardness when it came to light that she had faked her death, but given the circumstances and the confession Thornton had left, no charges were filed. The consensus seemed to be that a woman fleeing an abusive situation had done what she needed to do to survive, and that was the end of it. By Christmas of 1885, the money had been transferred to an account in Jack and Sarah's names, and the property in Leadville had been sold, with the proceeds added to their inheritance. It was more money than either of them had ever imagined having, and they spent long evenings discussing how best to use it. They decided to invest most of it in the ranch, purchasing additional land and livestock, and building a new, larger house that would accommodate their growing family. The old cabin they kept as a guest house and a reminder of where they had started. They also set aside money for the children's education, ensuring that Samuel and Mary and the new baby who would arrive in the spring would have opportunities neither Jack nor Sarah had enjoyed. Their third child, another son, was born in April of 1886. They named him James after Sarah's father, and he completed their family in a way that felt perfectly right. Samuel was a devoted big brother to both his younger siblings, and Mary, now 5, took it upon herself to teach James everything she knew, which resulted in much laughter and occasional chaos. As the years continued to pass, Jack and Sarah's love only deepened. They faced challenges, as all families do, from harsh winters to difficult calving seasons to the inevitable squabbles between children. But through it all, they remained each other's anchor, the steady presence that made everything else bearable. Samuel grew into a thoughtful young man who eventually attended college in Denver, studying law with the intention of helping people who found themselves in situations like his mother had once faced. Mary, true to her childhood declaration, became an expert horsewoman and helped manage the ranch alongside her father. James, the baby of the family, inherited his mother's love of books and his father's practical skills, and he found his calling as a teacher. Jack and Sarah grew old together, their hair turning gray and their hands becoming gnarled with age and hard work. But their love remained as fresh and vital as it had been that night in the saloon when they first met. They never tired of telling their story to their children and, eventually, their grandchildren, though they always emphasized the parts about courage, resilience, and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. On a warm summer evening in 1910, when Jack was 62 and Sarah was 55, they sat together on the porch of the big house they had built, watching the sun set over the valley that had been their home for more than 30 years. Their children were grown and scattered across Colorado, pursuing their own dreams, but they visited often, and the house was never quiet for long. "You remember what you said to me that first night?" Sarah asked, her hand in Jack's as it had been countless times before. "I said a lot of things that first night," Jack replied with a smile. "You will have to be more specific. You said he would never find me again, you promised me that, and I kept that promise." "You did more than that," Sarah said softly. "You gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams. You loved me when I did not think I was worthy of love. You became a father to a child that was not yours by blood, and you never once made me feel like that mattered. You built this," she gestured to the ranch spread out before them, "not just with your hands but with your heart. And you did it all out of kindness." Jack turned to face her, his eyes still bright with the love he had carried for her all these years. "I did it because loving you has been the greatest honor of my life. Because you took a lonely cowboy with a broken heart and showed him what it meant to be whole again. We saved each other, Sarah. That is the truth of it. We saved each other, and we built something beautiful from the ashes of our old lives." Sarah leaned in and kissed him, a soft, sweet kiss that held all the years of their life together. "I love you, Jack Morgan. I have loved you since the moment you caught me when I was falling, and I will love you until my last breath." "And I love you," Jack replied, "always and forever." They sat together as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky. Two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and had built a love that would endure long after they were gone. Their story, passed down through generations of Morgans, would become a family legend, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope and love can find a way. The ranch continued to thrive under Mary's capable management, and when Jack and Sarah eventually passed, within months of each other as though neither could bear to be without the other for long, they were laid to rest on a hill overlooking the valley, side by side as they had been in life. Their gravestone bore a simple inscription that captured the essence of their extraordinary love story, Jack and Sarah Morgan. He kept his promise. She found her home. Together they built a legacy of love. And so the story of the woman who stumbled into a saloon, pregnant and terrified, and the cowboy who promised to protect her, came to its close not with tragedy but with triumph. It was a story of resilience and redemption, of the power of love to heal and transform, and of the truth that family is not defined by blood but by the choices we make and the people we choose to stand beside. In the years that followed, the Morgan Ranch became known not just for its cattle and horses, but for the way it welcomed those in need, carrying on Jack and Sarah's legacy of providing sanctuary to those who were running from danger or simply seeking a new start. Mary made sure of that, remembering the stories her parents had told her, and determined to honor their memory by extending the same compassion they had shown to others. The old cabin where Jack and Sarah's love had first bloomed was preserved as it had been, and Mary's own children would play there, listening to stories about their grandparents and the great love that had created the family they were all part of. Samuel's legal practice in Denver became renowned for taking on cases involving domestic abuse, and he fought tirelessly for laws that would protect vulnerable women and children. James's students in the small schoolhouse he ran near the ranch learned not just reading and arithmetic, but also lessons about courage, integrity, and the importance of standing up for those who could not stand up for themselves. The legacy of Jack and Sarah Morgan lived on in countless ways, in the lives they touched directly, and in the ripple effects of the kindness and love they had shown each other and the world. Their story became a beacon of hope, proof that even when circumstances seem darkest, when the past seems inescapable and the future uncertain, love can light the way forward. And somewhere, in the quiet moments when the wind whispers through the valley and the stars shine bright over the Colorado mountains, you can almost hear it still, the promise that changed two lives and created a legacy that would endure for generations. He will never find you again. You are safe now, you are home. The story of Jack and Sarah Morgan was one of those rare tales that prove truth can be stranger and more beautiful than fiction. A reminder that the Wild West was not just a place of violence and lawlessness, but also a frontier where people could reinvent themselves, where love could flourish against all odds, and where a single moment of compassion could change the course of countless lives. Their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren would carry forward the values Jack and Sarah had lived by, creating their own stories of love and courage while always remembering the foundation upon which their family had been built. The ranch itself became a symbol of sanctuary and hope, a physical manifestation of the promise Jack had made on that fateful evening in 1878 when a desperate woman stumbled into a saloon and found not just safety, but a love that would define the rest of her life. And so we leave them there, Jack and Sarah Morgan, together for eternity on their hill overlooking the valley they loved, their story complete, their promise kept, their love triumphant over every obstacle that had been placed in their path. It is a story that reminds us that even in the roughest circumstances, even when hunted and afraid, even when the future seems impossible, there is always hope. There is always the possibility of finding someone who will stand beside you and say with absolute conviction, "He will never find you again. You are mine to protect now, and I will never let you fall." Their love story, born of desperation and nurtured through trials, had blossomed into something that transcended their individual lives, becoming a testament to the enduring power of human connection, compassion, and the courage to choose love even when fear would be easier. Jack Morgan, the lonely cowboy with a broken heart, and Sarah Bennett, the woman running for her life, had found in each other not just salvation but completion. And in doing so, they had created a legacy that would inspire generations to come. The Wild West may have been a harsh and unforgiving place, but it was also a land of second chances, where people could shed their old identities and forge new ones, where the past did not have to define the future, and where love, when given freely and protected fiercely, could overcome even the most daunting obstacles. Jack and Sarah's story embodied all of these truths, serving as a reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the simplest of promises, and that the truest form of courage is choosing to love when you have every reason to fear. As the sun set one final time over the Morgan Ranch, casting golden light across the valley where so much life and love had unfolded, it seemed fitting that their story should end not with sadness but with celebration, not with loss but with the knowledge that what they had built together would endure long after they were gone. The woman who had cried out for help and the cowboy who had answered her call had written a love story for the ages, one that proved beyond any doubt that sometimes, when you least expect it, when you are at your most vulnerable and afraid, life sends you exactly what you need in the form of another person willing to stand beside you and face whatever comes next together. And that, in the end, is what made Jack and Sarah Morgan's story so remarkable, not just that they survived, not just that they found love, but that they chose each other again and again, every single day, through every challenge and triumph, building a life and a legacy that would stand as proof that love, real and true and fiercely protected, can indeed conquer all.